Don't forget, May 4th. Pizza. Games. Pickleball.
Yes.
All right.
It's gonna be in the gym, right?
Yeah, that.
Yeah.
We'll do that.
No way you done.
All right, so if I remember rightly, I'm a couple of slides behind. A couple of announcements. There's two things I need you to be paying attention to.
Yes, ma'am. Jason Dixon. Joseph.
One is that, lost my train of thought. One is that your final exam is scheduled for the 11th of May, and I can't be here. So I have two options, right? I can put the exam online on Blackboard, which I'm happy to do. If I put it online, there will be a time limit on it because it's not open book, right? I wouldn't personally like that option because I don't like doing things on the time clock. So my other option, and I can do both, or I can do one or other. The other option is to run the exam on Monday the 9th. The problem with that is that you guys may have exams Monday the 9th because the exam schedule isn't my choice. You are told when your exam is. So I don't know if you're available on Monday the 9th. All right, so I need you to be thinking about that for the next couple of days because by the end of this week, I need to know what I'm planning for next week. Yes, sir? It'll be exactly the same exam. It'll just be online, not in the classroom. But, you know, the online one, you don't have access to me to ask me questions, and it would have to be timed. Yes?
How long the time?
2 hours.
No. Probably something like a minute and a half
That's it?
per question.
But I can't look through my
No,
book.
per question.
Well, that's, yeah, I know you can't.
You can try.
So,
Just take forever.
That's good.
think about that because as I say, later in the week, I need to have an idea. If no one is interested in doing it online, I'm not going to spend the time obviously typing it up. If no one is available on the 9th, then it'll be online. So, and I don't mind doing both if some people would prefer to take it in the classroom and other people don't mind doing online.
We couldn't just come in like on our own, like on a Monday, like say if you did have at 9 o'clock, if you have exams at 9 o'clock, couldn't they just come in like at every time?
Yeah, oh no, if we did it on the Monday, on the 9th, I'll organise a time, but then you can come in. If you can't make that time, you can come in whenever. Yeah. I am leaving on the 10th. So, I'll be here.
Forgot to, is this exam comprehensive or?
No, it's just over the last bit of material. So, okay, all right. There was something else, but there was pizza, there was exam, there was something else, but I don't remember.
What?
Extra credit, oh, of course.
Yes.
Huh. What?
Sucker Moto.
We got all
Whatever. I don't have time to grade the stuff I've already got on the plate. I don't have anything extra. All right. So, we're talking about risk factors for those risk factors is your blood lipid profile. So it's a really good idea to start keeping an eye on that. Once you get health insurance, and you guys will go out and get great jobs that include health insurance, then you probably will have the opportunity to get a free health checkup every year. I would start to take advantage of that because it's interesting to get the baseline. Right? So your blood lipid profile is measuring lipoproteins, so proteins that carry fat around in your bloodstream. And we have so far three different kinds that they've identified, right? Low density lipoproteins, LDLs. High density lipoproteins, HDLs, and then a relatively new addition to the grouping is very low density lipoproteins. So in this instance, it's back to front. Right? In my head, this is back to front, because I think of fats as being bad, but the high density fats are the good guys. Right? And the low density, so high is good and low is bad when we're looking at these. Right? And the very low density are the real evil guys. What we want when we have the lipid profile done is to be at low risk. We want low LDLs plus high HDLs, right? So the higher this measure is and the lower this measure is, the better off we are. If what we have is high LDLs and low HDLs, and you're quite young, this is really bad because that severely increases your risk of having a heart attack before the age of 60. Right? So this is a bad combination. So if you have a look here, these are the kinds of numbers that you want to be looking out for. They can also measure your triglycerides, so your storage form of fat that is floating in your bloodstream. Okay. We want this column. Right. Another measure that you'll see often nowadays is the ratio of my total cholesterol to my HDL, to my good cholesterol. Right? So that, it seems to be the most accurate risk index right now. If it's higher than 5, that puts you at increased risk of coronary artery disease. If it's lower than 3.0, then you're at low risk. So cholesterols, HDLs, LDLs, they're very closely linked to your coronary artery disease. Remember that the plaques that we talked about last week, when the plaque starts to form, then these LDLs get caught on the plaque and it gets bigger, and then we see blockage. Right? So that's the problem there. Other risk factors, hypertension. So we don't want to have high blood pressure. We want to try to keep our blood pressure as low as we can. Overweight and obesity is a risk factor for many people. Diabetes, right? And inactivity. So those risk factors, though, many of them are positively impacted by increasing our physical activity levels. So I can do diet, I can do meds, there's lots of things, but one of the simplest things I can do is just move more. So for us as the movement experts, that's a key one. We're not trained in nutrition. We've got some idea about nutrition, right? But that's not our training. But your training is movement. So can we increase people's physical activity? Increasing physical activity increases HDL. So when I'm physically active regularly, HDLs are higher. That's good, right? That's the positive one. There's some indication that if we exercise regularly, LDLs and total cholesterol go down. So that's good, right? Particularly with aerobic exercise, but also with resistance, there seems to be some positive impacts on LDLs there. Obviously, if I'm physically active, then that's going to impact my body composition, which can improve my risk of overweight and obesity. Exercising increases insulin sensitivity. So then I'm less likely to develop type 2 diabetes, or I'm better able to manage my type 2 diabetes. So there's so many positive adaptations that go on within the body when I'm physically active. And they can delay the onset and or delay the severity of coronary artery disease, right? So if I can just not get it, everybody in my family has it, but if I exercise, maybe I won't get it. Right? I can maybe counterbalance that hereditary aspect. Okay, medical clearance. You know, we did medical clearance information in labs. Go back, have a look at your lab 1 and 2. All right, remember that it's really important that you get medical clearance, particularly if your person that you're working with is one of these. But honestly, my recommendation would be get medical clearance for anybody, right? Because that way you're the most likely not to get sued. Right? Don't want to get sued. That's bad poisoning. All right, part of, for some people, part of medical clearance would be getting a clean stress test. So similar to the test that we saw run in the biology lab last week, all right, or week before. So many stress tests will include an ECG. And there's not going to be anything on the exam about ECGs, but I just wanted to show you because it's quite interesting. So, because ECGs can pick up issues that are connected to coronary artery disease. So if this ST segment here is below the horizontal line of the ECG, so the ST segment is depressed down here, that can indicate ischemia, damage to the heart muscle, right? And on other ones, you'll see a really big, steep, tall QRS complex. And the QRS complex gets taller as you get ventricular hypertrophy. So in this case, that hypertrophy would be pathological, not positive adaptation to exercise. Right? So I'm getting ventricle hypertrophy because my blood pressure is really high. Okay? So it can indicate that as well. So they're fascinating pieces of information. I would make your doctor tell you what they're looking at, right? Doctors have a nasty habit of going, oh yeah, so we've got this test result and blah, 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 they don't actually explain it to you, make them explain it. All right, so we're gonna start fit. Questions, any questions on any of that other? HDLs, LDLs, get those round the right way in your head, whichever, however that works for you. Right, LDLs are the bad guys, HDLs are the good guys. The best combination is a number low on LDLs and a number high on HDLs. All right, but even if you have high LDLs, the higher your HDLs are, the better off you are. So, all right. I handed out these, okay, just to help you as we're going through this material and as you're studying, because I think visually there's a lot of information about exercise programming, and it's easier if you've got it all in one block like this, okay? So you can fill this in as we're going through the lecture, or you can fill it in as you're doing your revision, whatever works for you. Also up on Blackboard, I have the most recent that I'm aware of ACSM guidelines for FIT. All right, so there's a practitioner article up there that puts all those out for you, okay, and lays out the ranges and things like that. So that info is available to help you. Now, there's a little bit of difference between what we're doing when we're looking at FIT and the guidelines that I gave you at the beginning of the semester. All right? So, we just went through that. Okay. One of the important things to think about is that there's a difference between health and fitness. So the more we learn, what we're realizing is we don't have to train like crazy every day to be healthy. Right? I can do that if I want to be super fit or if I want to compete at something. But there are many, many more options available for people who don't want to be in perfect shape. And I don't have to be in really good shape in order to be healthy. Okay? So the guidelines that I gave you earlier in the semester for your physical activity log were to do with health. All right? So 150 minutes per week of aerobic work at a moderate level, or 75 minutes a week of vigorous aerobic work. All right? So I can do what to us would feel relatively minimal amounts of moving and see very significant health benefits. And then the more I do, up to a point, the more health benefits I get and the fitter I get. Okay? So those health guidelines that we're working on for our physical activity log aren't appropriate as a training routine for someone who wants to compete. But they might be appropriate if you're a strength or a power athlete, because you want a minimum amount of aerobic fitness to support your strength and power work, right? So it depends on who you're working with. Just to give you an idea of how bad the picture is. So somewhere around 40% of the US adult population report that they don't do any physical activity at any level for a minimum of 10 minutes at a time. So I can tell you right now, we've been measuring the early childhood students on the playground when they're out there with the children. And at no time in a 25-minute session are they active for 10 minutes. And they're on a massive great playground outside in the sunshine. Right? Adults in this country do not move. So again, you guys are so far away from typical that I think sometimes it's difficult to remember what it's like for other people. Right? Only 22% of adults report doing anything that's vigorous enough to promote development and maintenance of aerobic fitness, and only about 20% say that they do anything that is resistance based a couple of times a week. So this is not a very good picture. And in New Mexico, recess is not required. So we're not teaching our children to do anything that's going to improve this picture. Right? We're not taking a very good stance on putting this right. Yes, sir.
So the kids don't like have any type of recess at all?
Well, so it's one of those legalese type semantic arguments. It's not required. So it's mandated. I think I've got those words around the right way. So it's mandated. That means it's highly suggested that you include recess in the curriculum. But it isn't required, so they don't have to. So if they're under pressure, or the weather's bad, or, right, then they can herd all the kids into the dinner hall and make them all sit down for the whole lunch break because it's snowing outside. And they don't want to have to go and stand in the snow and monitor the kid, right? So that's the problem. New Mexico, to my knowledge, is not one of the worst states when it comes to removing recess. We have places that don't have PE or recess now. None. They bring the kids to school and they sit all day, except going to lunch and back. So, Georgia. Let's see how far Georgia can go up in the unhealthy states in the next 10 years. So, right, New Mexico doesn't do that yet, but the problem is to my mind, the problem is the mindset that would say it's okay not to require recess. Right? That mindset is heading in the wrong direction. Okay, so let's start looking at our guidelines for more than just minimum health benefits. All right? So we want to be able to use the guidelines for a wide range of individuals. I don't want to have to recreate guidelines for an athlete versus a recreation person. So the guidelines are set up in a way that gives us lots of flexibility with setting up a training program. All right? So if I'm looking at aerobics, so cardiorespiratory guidelines, then we're going to look at the duration, the time, the type, the intensity, and duration, frequency, right? So, the time for each exercise session. So, the minimum threshold for fitness benefits is 20 to 30 minutes per session. The maximum for cardiorespiratory benefits is 60 minutes. So I've got quite a big range of time there to play around with for somebody. When I'm looking at the health guidelines, I can go to 10 minutes, but I've got to do that 3 times a day to make my 30 minutes for the day. All right? But if I'm looking at aerobic improvements, minimum of 20 to 30. So, as long as I'm meeting that minimum guideline, then I've got some options. I can go for 20 to 30 minutes because I'm really busy and that's all I've got time for. But I have to increase the intensity of the exercise. So I've got to go harder for a shorter period of time. Personally, me, I don't like the high intensity thing. I'd rather do something a little more moderate, but that means I have to go for longer. Right? If I'm going to do 20 minutes at only low to moderate intensity, then I'm not going to see aerobic improvement. Right? For most people then, because a lot of people don't like this high intensity, it's too uncomfortable, it hurts too much, it makes me sweat too much, everything's tired afterwards. Right? For you guys, that's a good thing. You like that feeling. For most people, that's a blah. I don't like working out that hard. Right? So for the majority of people, what you're looking at is a slightly longer session of moderate intensity, somewhere between 30 to 60 minutes. The other problem with the typical population, when you're looking at the high intensity end of the scale, is that puts me at much more risk of getting hurt. Right? I'm much more likely to get an injury, to break something, tear something, if I'm working out at high intensity. It also increases the cardiovascular risk. So we said last week that when we exercise is when we see angina symptoms. Right? Because it's when we stress the partial blockage that we start to find out the problem. So if your person has not had a stress test as part of their medical clearance, or if there's some other kind of cardio issue that was not picked up on a stress test, then the higher the intensity, the more risk they're at. So you want to avoid that. And then the real biggie, here's the biggest problem. The higher the intensity for someone that is not an athlete, the lower the adherence to the program. Right? They quit quickly because it's not fun when it's that much work. So frequency, how often do we train a week? So for aerobic work, the minimum for improvement is 3 days a week. So I've got to do something aerobic 3 days a week if I want to see improvement in aerobic capability. Maximum 5, I've seen 6 on some guidelines, not 7. Right? I should not be doing aerobic work for training 7 days a week. So it doesn't mean I can't walk my dog on my day off or go play around in the swimming pool, because that's not training. Okay? Does that make sense? So 3 to 5, as I say, I have seen 6, but most of the guidelines say 3 to 5. You don't see a lot of benefit if you do 6 from an aerobic standpoint. Right? Plus you get more injury occurrence on 6 or 7 days a week, so it's not a good plan. Right? Most of the benefit that you're going to get for VO2, you can get within a 3-day aerobic week. Types, anything big muscle group, right? So large muscle groups. So walking, running, biking, ellipticals, Swimming, right? Probably not cycle, but swimming, right? Rowing's a good one, dancing, Zumba, any of those kind of things. All right, you've got a table on page 384 in your book that has some good suggestions for the type of exercise, depending upon the group, the population that you're working with. And then our important one, intensity. Right? Remember that intensity of exercise, how hard I'm working, what is the stress I am putting on the body. That's the most important variable for aerobic improvement. Right? If I'm going to get aerobically fit, I have to keep track of the intensity that I'm working at. Minimum 55 to 65% of heart rate max. What if I've got someone who's obese? Am I going to put them on a program of 55% of their heart rate max if they're 300 pounds overweight? Right? Not unless you have really, really, really good insurance. Okay? All right? So if you have someone who is very overweight or even obese, you may have to do a whole different kind of health training to even get them fit enough to work on aerobic capacity. That may not be an option for that population at the beginning of working with them. For optimal gains, between 77, 78 and 90% of heart rate max. All right? So if I have someone who's healthy enough to be doing an aerobic program, what is the goal of the program? Okay. So I would say, depending on what the goal is, you want to remember a couple of other items that we've brought up in the past. Because what if your person says, well, I do want to get aerobically fit, but my number one goal is to lose some fat mass. So remember our fat max zone runs from 68 to 79% of heart rate max, right? Well, that's actually a really nice range for also getting some aerobic benefit. But I don't want to work over 80% or higher, because then I'm only going to use carbohydrate, right? I'm not going to utilize fat. And when's the crossover point? When do we start to use fat predominantly over carbs? How long? What's the time? A little bit less. It's around, but 30 minutes is the right training area, right? So you start to switch over somewhere around 20 to 25 minutes. So I can't just run for 20 minutes. Right? Remember, 20 minutes is the minimum time. But if I do 20 minutes and my goal is fat loss, I stop right at the point where I'm about to switch to using the most amount of fat. So that's not a good idea, right? So you want to think about all three components there, depending on what the person's goal for the program is. If they're thin, or if they don't care about losing weight, and all they want is to be aerobically fit enough to run a marathon, different goal, right? use the guidelines in a different combination. All right, we'll have a quick look at intensity. We went through this stuff in lab, so we'll go quickly through here. Measures of intensity for aerobic work. I can use a percentage of my max heart rate. Remember that heart rate has a linear equation with workload, all right? So I can use heart rate instead of VO2 if I want to. I can convert if I've got a training program that's in percentage VO2 and I don't want to use that, I can convert it to percentage heart rate max. Okay. Remember to estimate heart rate max, the easy version is 220 minus your age. There's quite a big error built in there because it's a little vague. There are some other versions of that estimate. So this one is 207, I've also seen a 208. Right, there are a couple of different versions that make it more accurate, doesn't mean it's right, right? Unless you are hooked up to sophisticated equipment, we can't know what your max heart rate is. Okay, what did the young lady make on the treadmill the other week? 194, I think, was her top heart rate on that test. Right? So it wasn't too far. I think she said she was 21. So her max heart rate would have been 199 if we had estimated it. We would have overestimated it a little bit. Okay. If I want to use a percentage of my VO2 max, but I don't have access to that kind of information, then you can use heart rate reserve to estimate VO2. So it's called the Carbonen method, and I can use that, and it's very close to a VO2 measure. So I take my heart rate max, I subtract my heart rate at rest, and that gives me my heart rate reserve, and I can use a percentage of that instead of percentage VO2 max. Ratings of perceived exertion. All right, so we have a Borg scale that runs from 6 to 20. In chapter 14 in your book, they have a scale that's called Omni that runs from 1 to 10, I think, and it also has pictures. So it has a little picture of the guy cycling up the hill and how hard is he. And so you can use the Omni scale with children, which would be useful if in certain circumstances, depending on what your role is. All right? Remember that a Borg scale is not to be used with beginners. They're not good at estimating how hard they're working. We can use NETS. NETS is a measure you see around a lot. It's kind of the sexy intensity measure of the day at the moment. I have some personal bad feelings about METs because I still cannot work out what alters METs from RPE, right? If a MET is how much oxygen you use at rest, and I tell you you have to work at 4 METs, that means you have to estimate working hard enough to use 4 times more oxygen than you do when you're sitting down. Right?
What a hyperventilating?
Sorry?
What the hyperventilating?
Yeah. So I don't know how you do that, right? I mean, how do I know when is 4 times harder than when I'm sitting down? Isn't that the same as a Borg scale? I still feel like I have read and read and read about METs, and I still feel like I'm missing something on them. They also don't allow for improvement in your fitness level, right? the exercise, there's a whole table in your chapter. This exercise equates to about this many METs. Well, what happens when I'm fitter or when I'm more skilled? Because when I'm more skilled, I use less energy to do the same piece of work as someone who is less skilled, right? Because mechanically I'm more efficient. It also doesn't allow for all our environmental conditions that we've been talking about, being up at altitude versus being at sea level. So I'm not personally bought into using METs. I'm going to stick with my percentage heart rate because it's accurate, I can measure it, and I don't know how well I could estimate what is 4 times harder than sitting still. But that's a personal, it's not to say that they're not valid. They are valid, and there's a lot of literature out there right now that is using METs as the measure of intensity. Okay. All right, we'll come back to a talk test. I suspect we are not going to get this chapter done until Monday, because there's a lot more to come.
What's on Monday?
Which means that, oh, I remember what the other thing was now. Which means that the next chapter on training populations, special populations, we're not going to have enough time to do the whole chapter. So I'd like you to look at that chapter and tell me which populations you would prefer to cover. Because I'm going to have to pick a few and then you're going to have to do the rest of